Before we begin tonight's deep dive into the mysteries of the mind, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. We love hearing how far and wide this relaxing community stretches. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin our journey into the strangest, most mind-bending aspects of consciousness. Consciousness is the most familiar yet elusive thing in the universe. It's the soft presence in your mind that lets you feel, think, perceive, and be. It's the light behind your eyes, the voice in your thoughts, the feeling of being you. And yet, despite how central it is to your experience, modern science still can't explain what consciousness actually is. You may be lying in bed right now, aware of your surroundings, aware of your breath, and aware that you're aware. That awareness is consciousness. It feels obvious, automatic, but that's part of the mystery. Why does any of this feel like anything at all? This question is known as the hard problem of consciousness. The term was coined by philosopher David Chalmers in 1995 to differentiate it from the easy problems of neuroscience. Easy problems in this context don't mean trivial, but they are answerable. Scientists can explain how the brain controls movement, processes visual information, stores memories, or reacts to danger. These are complex problems, but they're physical and functional. The hard problem, by contrast, is this. How do physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience? Or more simply, why does being alive feel like anything at all? When you see the color red, you don't just register the wavelength of light. You experience it as a rich, vivid internal sensation. The redness of red. You feel emotions. You hear music, not just as vibrations in your ear, but as moving, emotional experiences. You taste coffee, not just as a chemical reaction, but as bitterness, warmth, pleasure. These are qualia, the private, internal textures of experience. They're the building blocks of conscious life. And yet, science has no explanation for why they exist. You can imagine a robot with a camera that detects red. It can be programmed to recognize that color, to associate it with stop signs or apples. But that robot doesn't feel red. It processes information without experiencing it. And yet, we humans do. This raises a disturbing possibility. Could the entire physical description of the universe be incomplete? In the current scientific framework, the universe is composed of matter and energy, governed by laws of physics. But nowhere in those equations is there a mention of subjective experience. You could, in theory, map every neuron in your brain and still not understand why it feels like you inside that body. This problem is not just philosophical, it's deeply scientific. We don't even know where to begin. Every attempt to explain consciousness in purely physical terms runs into a wall. Some scientists believe that once we map every detail of the brain, consciousness will fall out of the equations. But others argue that this view misses something fundamental, that consciousness might not emerge from matter, but might be a basic property of reality, like space, time, or gravity. This is the radical theory of panpsychism. Panpsychism suggests that consciousness is not something that only humans, or even animals, possess. Rather, it's a fundamental aspect of everything. Every particle of matter might possess a tiny glimmer of consciousness, a speck of awareness. These aren't minds, not in the way we think of them, but rather proto-consciousness, like the first ingredients of a recipe. To many, this sounds far-fetched. How could a rock or an atom be conscious? But proponents of panpsychism argue that it may be the only way to solve the hard problem without resorting to magical thinking. After all, how does non-conscious matter suddenly produce consciousness just by becoming? Complex? Isn't that just replacing one mystery with another? Still, panpsychism is not the only theory. Some researchers propose that consciousness arises from specific kinds of information processing. The integrated information theory, IIT, for instance, suggests that any system with a high degree of interconnectedness and feedback may be conscious to some extent. According to IIT, even a sufficiently complex computer might one day experience something like consciousness, though perhaps very different from ours. Then there are emergentist theories, which argue that consciousness arises when the brain reaches a certain level of complexity, just like liquidity emerges from the interactions of water molecules. But this doesn't explain why consciousness feels the way it does. Emergentist models describe the when and how, but not the why. That missing why is precisely what makes the problem so hard. To understand just how strange this all is, imagine a world populated by philosophical zombies, creatures who behave exactly like humans in every way, but who have no inner experience. They eat, sleep, talk, laugh, cry, but there's no one inside. From the outside, they are indistinguishable from us, but they're hollow. No feelings, no consciousness. Now ask yourself, how do you know that you're not one of them? The answer seems obvious. You're aware that you're aware. But how would you prove that to anyone else? You can describe your experiences, but you can't transmit them. You can never truly know what it's like to be someone else. Their red might not be your red. Their sadness might feel different. This is the privacy of consciousness, and it makes it nearly impossible to study using conventional scientific methods. This is part of the reason why consciousness was avoided in scientific circles for so long. For most of the 20th century, psychology was dominated by behaviorism, a school of thought that focused only on observable behavior. If you couldn't see it or measure it, it didn't exist, or at least it didn't matter. Consciousness was dismissed as too subjective, too mysterious, too unscientific. But in recent decades, consciousness has crept back into the scientific spotlight. Advances in neuroscience, brain imaging, and cognitive psychology have reignited interest in the inner workings of the mind. We can now scan brains and see what regions light up during different thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. But again, we're just seeing correlations. We're no closer to understanding why those neural patterns give rise to experience. One of the most tantalizing questions is this: could consciousness exist without a brain? This may sound like science fiction, but it's a question some physicists and philosophers take seriously. If consciousness is truly a fundamental feature of the universe, then perhaps it doesn't require biology at all. Maybe stars have some form of awareness, or black holes, or the universe itself. This idea dovetails with ancient spiritual traditions from around the world, many of which view consciousness as a universal field, something that exists independently of the individual mind. In some interpretations of Hinduism and Buddhism, consciousness is not something you have, but something you are, a cosmic ocean in which individual minds are just temporary waves. Interestingly, some modern physicists echo this view. Quantum theory, for example, has long puzzled scientists with its strange insistence that observation affects reality. Could consciousness be the missing ingredient in explaining why particles behave differently when measured? That idea is controversial and speculative, but it highlights just how deep the mystery goes. Consciousness might not just be a scientific puzzle. It could be a window into the most profound truths of existence. And yet, we still don't even know how to define it properly. Is consciousness continuous, or does it flicker on and off? Do animals experience it? How? About plants? How about artificial intelligence? Until we can answer the hard problem, we're left in the dark, aware, but unable to explain our awareness. The greatest mystery might be the one closest to us, the one we live with every moment of our lives. In the next part of this series, we'll dive into the world of split-brain patients, where surgery designed to relieve epilepsy produced startling evidence that our sense of self may not be as unified as we think. If you've ever wondered whether your mind is truly unified, the story of split-brain patients might make you rethink everything you believe about the self. This phenomenon challenges one of the most basic assumptions we carry: that consciousness is singular, that it flows like one uninterrupted stream from one internal I. But under certain circumstances, that unity begins to break apart. And what emerges is one of the strangest and most thought-provoking discoveries in neuroscience. Let's begin with some background. Inside your head, your brain is divided into two hemispheres, the left and the right. These hemispheres are largely symmetrical in structure, but they often specialize in different tasks. The left hemisphere, in most people, tends to be more verbal, analytical, and logical. The right hemisphere is more spatial, emotional, and intuitive. The two halves of your brain communicate through a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. This structure contains hundreds of millions of connections and allows the left and right brains to work together seamlessly. In normal, healthy brains, you'd never notice that your mind is made of two halves. They cooperate so well, it feels like a single self. But in the mid-20th century, neurosurgeons began performing a radical procedure on patients with severe epilepsy. They severed the corpus callosum to prevent seizures from spreading from one hemisphere to the other. The surgery, known as corpus callosotomy, was often successful in controlling seizures. but it had unexpected side effects that changed our understanding of consciousness forever. After the surgery, patients appeared normal at first glance. They could walk, talk, and carry on conversations. Their personalities remained intact. But when researchers began performing carefully designed experiments, strange things began to happen. The classic split brain experiments went something like this. Researchers would present images to just one half of the brain at a time. This was possible because visual information from the right field of vision is processed by the left hemisphere, and information from the left field of vision is processed by the right hemisphere. By flashing an image only to the left or right visual field, scientists could effectively communicate with only one side of the brain. When shown a picture of an object in the right visual field, processed by the left hemisphere, patients could easily name what they saw. "That's a key," they might say. "No problem." But when the same object was shown to the left visual field, processed by the right hemisphere, something odd happened. The patient said they saw nothing. Yet, when asked to reach under a screen and select the matching object with their left hand, controlled by the right brain, they could do it accurately. This suggested something startling. The right hemisphere had seen the object, understood it, and chosen it, without the patient's verbal awareness. In another experiment, the word toadstool was flashed, toad to the right hemisphere and stool to the left. When asked to say what they saw, the patient would respond, stool. But when asked to draw what they saw with their left hand, they drew a toad. Two different responses, one from each hemisphere. Perhaps the most bizarre part came when the left hemisphere, the verbal side, was asked to explain the left hand's behavior. The left brain didn't say, "I don't know." Instead, it made up a story. When the right hemisphere was shown a snowy scene and the left hemisphere was shown a chicken foot, the patient saw both images, but only the left hand, right brain, pointed to a shovel, while the right hand, left brain, pointed to a chicken. When asked to explain, the patient said, "The chicken goes with the chicken foot, and you need a shovel to clean out the chicken coop." The left hemisphere had no access to the snow scene. It literally hadn't seen it, but it invented a reason for the right hand's action, completely unaware that it was guessing. This behavior is called confabulation, and it happens when the brain fills in gaps in memory or awareness with plausible but false explanations. Split-brain patients did this regularly, showing that even our sense of logic and agency might be a post hoc construction. So what does all of this mean? Some scientists and philosophers suggest that split-brain patients might actually have two consciousnesses, one in each hemisphere. Two separate minds, each with its own thoughts, experiences, and perceptions. When the corpus callosum is intact, these two minds operate in harmony, creating the illusion of a unified self. But when it's cut, the division becomes visible. It's important to note that one of these consciousnesses, the one housed in the right hemisphere, does not have access to language in most people. It can't speak, but it seems to think, reason, feel, and act on its own. It can even make decisions that the left hemisphere doesn't understand. This has enormous implications for how we think about identity. Are we truly one person, or are we a coalition of subsystems, each contributing to what we perceive as a unified mind? Even in healthy brains, the evidence suggests that our sense of self might be an illusion. Neurologist V.S. Ramachandran once described the brain as a parliament rather than a monarchy, a collection of competing voices that vote on decisions, with consciousness acting like a spokesperson after the fact. This idea aligns with what's known as the modular mind theory, which argues that the brain is composed of specialized systems that handle different tasks, often without our awareness. The self is not a single, continuous entity, but a process, a construction pieced together moment by moment by these modules. Split brain studies make that process visible. When the communication lines between modules break down, the illusion of unity begins to dissolve. And if consciousness is not inherently unified, but a byproduct of cooperation between different systems, then many of our deepest intuitions about identity, free will, and personal continuity may need to be revised. So, who are you? Are you your left brain, your right, both? What happens if they disagree? And could this internal division be present in all of us, even without surgery, just better hidden? As we drift deeper into the mysteries of the mind, remember, sometimes the most shocking truths are not out there in the cosmos, but right here inside your skull. In the next part of this journey, we'll explore the binding problem, another strange and seemingly impossible feat your brain performs every waking moment. Every second you're awake, your brain processes an overwhelming amount of information. You see colors, shapes, motion. You hear sounds, feel sensations, smell aromas, and interpret language. These inputs come from different sensory channels, processed in different regions of your brain. And yet, your experience is seamless, unified, coherent. You see a red ball rolling across a wooden floor and perceive it as a single, continuous event. A red ball in motion on a brown surface, not as scattered fragments of color, shape, motion, texture, and sound. This effortless unity is one of the great achievements of the brain, but it's also one of its most perplexing mysteries. This is known as the binding problem. Put simply, the binding problem asks, how does the brain combine information from different senses and brain areas into a single unified experience of the world? To understand the depth of this mystery, let's break it down. When you look at a red apple, your visual cortex processes its color, shape, and depth in separate regions. Color might be handled in one area, shape in another, motion in yet another. And those visual features are still separate from the smell of the apple, its taste, the sound it makes when bitten, or the tactile sensation of its smooth skin. Yet you don't perceive these features as isolated data points. You perceive an apple, a singular familiar object with many characteristics bound together. But the brain has no known center where all this information gets put together. There is no command room where different data streams are stitched into a movie of experience. The brain is decentralized. It processes features in parallel across specialized and distributed regions. There is no known location where these separate data channels are fused. So how does it happen? How does your brain bind all of this disparate data into one fluid conscious moment? One possible explanation involves synchronous firing. Some neuroscientists suggest that neurons encoding different features of the same object may fire in synchrony, essentially marking their outputs as belonging together. The neurons involved in processing the color red, the roundness of the apple, and its movement might fire in rhythmic coordination, allowing the brain to tag them as part of a single object. This is known as the temporal binding hypothesis. It's an elegant idea, but it remains speculative. The timing of neural activity may be part of the answer, but the mechanism is still poorly understood. And even if neurons fire in synchrony, how does that create the subjective experience of seeing an apple? Another approach looks at attention. Perhaps what we attend to is what gets bound together. You may see many objects in a room, but only the ones you focus on become rich, fully formed experiences. Your brain selects, enhances, and integrates what you're paying attention to, while the rest fades into the background. But attention doesn't solve the mystery, it merely shifts it. How does attention cause binding, and what determines what you attend to in the first place? The binding problem becomes even more puzzling when we consider cross-modal binding, the way the brain combines inputs from different senses. When you watch someone speaking, for example, you don't just hear a voice and see a face. You experience a unified event. The lip movements sync with the sounds. The person becomes a coherent source of speech, emotion, and presence. Yet sound and vision are processed in entirely different parts of the brain. Your auditory cortex is in your temporal lobe. Your visual cortex is in the back of your head. And yet somehow, the brain aligns them in real time. If the lip movements and speech become even slightly misaligned, as in a poorly dubbed video, you immediately notice something's off. Your brain expects perfect synchrony. This alignment happens so effortlessly that we rarely stop to think about it. But when we do, we're left with a deep mystery. How does the brain create a unified field of consciousness from scattered and asynchronous data? Some researchers propose that consciousness itself is the binding agent, that awareness is what brings different streams together into a single point of view. But this leads to another problem. What exactly is awareness, and how does it do any of this? Others believe the unity of perception is an illusion, a kind of useful trick. The philosopher Daniel Dennett argues that there is no central place in the brain where consciousness happens. Instead, he proposes a multiple drafts model in which many interpretations are constantly being generated in parallel by different brain systems. The feeling of a unified experience is simply the brain's best guess, reconstructed after the fact. In this view, your consciousness is less like a camera recording reality in real time and more like a newsroom. stitching together stories from different sources, cleaning them up and presenting a coherent narrative. The story feels seamless, but it's full of edits, cuts, and reconstructions. Some of it may even be fabricated. There's some evidence to support this. Studies have shown that when visual information is briefly disrupted, like when a moving object disappears behind a wall and reappears, the brain fills in the gap. You don't see a break. You see continuous motion. Your brain smooths over the missing information, creating the illusion of fluidity. So if consciousness is stitched together from scattered pieces, and if binding is a post hoc process, then what happens to our sense of reality? Is the world as we experience it just a clever construction, like a dream we share? This possibility is both humbling and awe-inspiring. If your experience of the world is a seamless narrative crafted by your brain, then you are not just living in the world, you are participating in its creation, moment by moment. And this construction isn't perfect. It can be fooled. Optical illusions exploit the binding problem. The famous rubber hand illusion, for example, shows how easily the brain can be tricked into binding touch, vision, and proprioception to a fake hand, making you feel that a plastic hand is your own. Even more extreme are cases of synesthesia, where the brain binds senses in unusual ways. A synesthete might see colors when they hear music, or taste flavors when they read words. These experiences are involuntary and consistent, suggesting that their brains are binding data differently than the norm. What this tells us is that there's more than one way to bind experience, and that your version of reality might be just one flavor of many. The binding problem touches on deep philosophical questions too. If perception is an act of synthesis, then what is the self that holds it all together? Is there a central observer inside your mind? Or is the self itself a binding illusion? Many traditions suggest the latter. In some strands of Buddhism, for instance, the self is viewed as a convenient fiction, a bundle of sensations, thoughts, and memories held together by habit. Neuroscience may be catching up to that view. If your brain is the conductor of a massive sensory orchestra, then perhaps the music of your experience is not playing to a listener inside your mind. It is the listener. As we close this part of the journey, think about this. Every sound you hear, every image you see, every memory you recall is the product of an astonishing binding process happening silently, instantaneously, and mysteriously in your brain. It's a miracle you live with every moment, but rarely notice, until now. In the next part, we'll explore the mystery of time perception, why time sometimes crawls, sometimes flies, and how consciousness shapes the very flow of reality. Time is one of the most fundamental dimensions of our existence. Every second of your life is carried forward by it. We measure time with clocks, calendars, and atomic pulses. We try to control it, save it, and manage it. And yet, For all its apparent precision, time as we experience it is deeply subjective. Sometimes minutes stretch into what feels like hours. At other times, hours vanish in a blink. Waiting in line at the bank can feel like an eternity, while a meaningful conversation with a friend might dissolve in an instant. This elasticity of time isn't just a trick of language or emotion. It reflects something strange and elusive at the heart of consciousness itself. This phenomenon is known as subjective time perception, and it raises a profound question. Why doesn't time always feel like it flows at a constant rate? To explore this, let's begin with a simple fact. Time in the brain has no single clock. There's no central organ that tracks seconds like a wristwatch. Instead, your sense of time is reconstructed from multiple neural systems, each operating at different scales and speeds. Some of these systems are responsible for moment-to-moment perception, like processing speech or music. Others help you understand durations, how long something has lasted, and still others are responsible for memory, how long ago something happened. These different clocks often disagree, and the result is a flexible, distorted, and deeply personal experience of time. Let's take a common example. When you're scared, time seems to slow down. This is especially true in moments of intense danger, like a car crash or a sudden fall. In these moments, people often report that everything seems to move in slow motion, like in a movie. But why? One explanation is that during fear, your brain becomes hyper-aware. Your attention sharpens. You take in more detail, more quickly. Later, when you recall the event, your brain has so much information stored that it feels like more time must have passed. In reality, the event might have lasted only seconds, but your brain recorded it in high definition, so it feels longer. This has led some researchers to propose that time doesn't slow down during fear, it only feels slower in retrospect. However, others argue that our perception of time might genuinely shift in the moment due to changes in neurochemical activity. The neurotransmitter dopamine, for instance, is deeply involved in time perception. When dopamine levels are high, time feels like it passes more quickly. When they're low, time can drag. Drugs that affect dopamine, such as amphetamines or antipsychotics, also tend to distort people's ability to estimate time intervals. This hints at a broader truth. Your brain is not a passive receiver of time. It's an active creator of time. This becomes even clearer when we consider how different states of consciousness affect time. During flow states, those moments of deep immersion when you lose yourself in a task, time often seems to disappear altogether. Athletes, artists, and musicians describe this sensation as being in the zone. There's no awareness of past or future, only the present. Minutes or hours might pass without notice. The opposite happens during boredom or anxiety. Time crawls. A 5-minute wait can feel endless. In these moments, The brain seems to stretch each second out, filling it with self-awareness, anticipation, and discomfort. The more you monitor time, the slower it feels. This is why time passes more slowly when you stare at the clock. Ironically, the act of watching time distorts your experience of it. Sleep, too, has its own time distortions. Dreams can feel like they last for hours, though they occur in a matter of minutes. During deep sleep, time might vanish entirely. You close your eyes, and suddenly it's morning. Your conscious self drops out of time and only returns when you awaken. And then there's aging. Most people report that time seems to speed up as they get older. Childhood summers felt endless. Adult years seem to vanish. Psychologists have proposed many explanations for this. One is that as we age, fewer things are novel. We experience more routines, more repetition, and the brain encodes novel experiences more richly than familiar ones. When we're young, everything is new, and our brains are flooded with impressions. As adults, our lives often become predictable. From the brain's perspective, novelty slows time because it demands attention and memory. Familiarity, on the other hand, compresses time. That's why a week filled with new experiences feels longer than a month of sameness. This connection between memory and time brings us to one of the most mind-bending questions. Is time itself an illusion? In physics, time is typically treated as a dimension, one that flows forward, governed by the arrow of entropy. But in your mind, time is reconstructed moment by moment through memory and attention. If your memories were erased, would time still have meaning? Some researchers argue that consciousness creates the illusion of time by linking experiences through memory. Without memory, there would be no continuity, just a series of isolated nows. This theory is supported by cases of brain injury. Some patients with amnesia live in a kind of perpetual present. They cannot remember the past or imagine the future. Their sense of time becomes unanchored. It's not just memory that is lost. It's the experience of time itself. The philosopher Augustine once said, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I try to explain it, I do not know." This paradox sits at the heart of subjective time. You live in time. You feel it. You age through it. But try to pin it down and it slips through your fingers. Even your perception of now is slippery. The brain takes time to process information. So, in a sense, every experience you have is already a tiny bit in the past. Some researchers estimate that what you perceive as now is actually delayed by up to half a second. To compensate, your brain predicts. It anticipates the future and smooths over the delays, creating the illusion of a present moment that never truly exists. What you're experiencing isn't the world as it is, but the world as your brain has constructed it, a carefully timed simulation. This leads to a fascinating idea. Your sense of time might be a controlled hallucination. It's shaped by biology, attention, emotion, culture, memory, and context. It bends, warps and loops. It can be expanded with wonder or shrunk by routine. It can heal wounds or deepen them. And yet, for all its strange qualities, time is the thread that holds your story together. Consciousness doesn't exist without time. It unfolds in it, rides on it, shapes it. You might be lying in bed right now, feeling the seconds pass, hearing the soft tick of the world outside. But those ticks aren't time itself. They're markers your mind uses to build something richer, the flow of life. Take a moment and reflect. You are here, right now, listening, thinking, feeling. There's a sense of being located behind your eyes, inside your head, a quiet center of awareness. You may not know how you got here or why you're conscious at all, but there's no denying the fact that you are. You are you. But why? Why is there a you at the center of your experience instead of just a body responding to inputs and outputs like a machine? Why does your consciousness feel like it belongs to one particular identity, one perspective, one continuous self? This is the mystery of the self. And it's one of the most hauntingly strange aspects of consciousness. Philosophers have wrestled with the self for centuries. Is it a soul, a mind, a stream of thoughts, a stable essence? Or is the self just an illusion, something the brain creates to make sense of its inner workings? Let's begin with what seems obvious. You feel like a single, coherent person. You have a name, a history, preferences, a voice in your head that narrates your life. You have memories of childhood, goals for the future, and the ability to reflect on your own existence. This continuity gives you a sense of identity. But is it real? From a scientific perspective, the self is not a single thing inside your brain. There's no special neuron, no central location, no inner homunculus pulling the strings. Instead, the self appears to be a construction, a dynamic, ongoing process that emerges from the interaction of various brain regions, sensory systems, and memories. In other words, your sense of self is more like a story than a structure. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio describes the self as a set of patterns the brain uses to represent the body, the past, and the social world. These patterns help the brain navigate reality, make predictions, and build a coherent identity. But they're not fixed. They shift, adapt, and evolve. You are not who you were 10 years ago, not even yesterday. Your thoughts have changed. Your memories have changed. Your body has changed. Yet you feel as though you've remained the same person throughout. This is known as the paradox of personal identity. Your brain is made of billions of neurons, and those neurons are constantly changing. Every experience rewires you, yet somehow you feel like a continuous being. It's as if your brain maintains an internal self-model that keeps updating while preserving just enough continuity to feel stable. But what happens when that model breaks? Cases of brain injury and neurological disorders offer startling clues. In dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, Patients appear to have multiple distinct selves, each with its own voice, memories, and behaviors. In some cases, even physiological responses, like allergies or handwriting, can differ between identities. Then there's depersonalization disorder, in which people report feeling detached from themselves, as if watching their life from the outside. They no longer feel real. The self, once so familiar, becomes alien. Or take Capgras syndrome, a rare condition in which patients believe that someone close to them, often a spouse or parent, has been replaced by an identical imposter. The visual recognition system still works, but the emotional resonance is gone. The brain can no longer match the face to the internal sense of the person. These disorders suggest that the self is not a singular, solid object. It's a network of functions. And when those functions fall out of sync, the self begins to fragment. In some cases, even brain surgery can dissolve the sense of self. During certain procedures, patients remain awake while surgeons stimulate specific areas of the brain. In some instances, stimulation of the temporoparietal junction can induce out-of-body experiences. Patients report floating above themselves or watching their own body from a different angle. What does this tell us? It suggests that your sense of being located in a particular place in space, usually behind your eyes, is not fixed. It's part of the brain's spatial self-representation, and it can be altered. So again, who is the you that lives behind your eyes? Some neuroscientists argue that the self is an illusion, but not in the sense of being fake. Rather, it's like a user interface, an efficient way for the brain to organize information. Your self is the character your brain writes into the story of your life. It's a center of gravity in the storm of sensation and thought. And illusions, though unreal, can be useful. Think of the mirror self-recognition test, a classic experiment in which animals are marked with a dot and placed in front of a mirror. If they touch the dot on themselves, not the mirror, it suggests they recognize the reflection as self. Great apes, dolphins, elephants, and even some birds have passed this test. But most animals do not. This raises an unsettling possibility. Consciousness might not require a self. You can be aware without being self-aware. In fact, for much of your life, you probably operate on autopilot. Brushing your teeth, walking to the store, driving home from work. Your actions unfold without much self-reflection. The self returns only when attention shifts inward. And when it does return, it often feels like the most private thing in the universe. This is the core of the first-person perspective. Only you know what it's like to be you. No one else has access to your inner world. No one else hears your thoughts, sees your dreams, or feels your emotions exactly as you do. But here's the twist. From the outside, you're just a body, a voice, a face, no different from any other. The richness of your inner world is hidden from everyone else, and theirs is hidden from you. So how do we know that others are conscious at all? This is the problem of other minds. We assume that others have experiences like ours, but we can never prove it. You know what it's like to be you, but you'll never know what it's like to be your friend, your partner, or a stranger on the street. This separateness is what makes the self both beautiful and lonely. And it brings us to perhaps the strangest question of all. Why are you you and not someone else? Why are you inside this body, in this time, in this moment? Why weren't you born as someone else? Or never born at all? This is the question of personal subjectivity, and no scientific theory has yet explained it. Physics can describe how matter behaves, how particles interact, but it says nothing about why one particular perspective is having this experience. It's not even clear how to begin answering this. But for many, it's the most pressing mystery of all. Because in the end, all experience is personal. The world you know, the colors, the sounds, the memories, the feelings, exists only in relation to the self. Without a self, there is no you to witness anything. But perhaps the self is more fluid than we think. Some spiritual traditions speak of the self as an illusion, not in the dismissive sense, but as something to be transcended. In Buddhism, the idea of anatta, or non-self, teaches that clinging to the self causes suffering. Letting go of the self opens the door to peace, unity, and compassion. And interestingly, modern neuroscience often echoes this. When people enter states of deep meditation or take certain psychedelics, they report losing their sense of self. The boundaries between self and world dissolve. Time disappears. What remains is often described as pure awareness, without identity. Could it be that your true nature is not the story you tell yourself, but the awareness that hears the story? It's a possibility worth pondering. As you drift into sleep tonight, let that question rest gently in your mind, not to solve it, but to feel its weight. What is the self? Where does it begin and end? And who really is asking the question? When you close your eyes and reflect, it seems obvious. You've been here all along. From your earliest memories to this very moment, there's been a single, unbroken thread of awareness, a continuous you moving through time, like a needle stitching together the story of your life. But what if that thread is an illusion? What if consciousness doesn't flow smoothly like a river, but instead flickers in and out like the frames of a film, rapid, fragmented, stitched together by memory and prediction into something that feels whole? This possibility challenges one of the most intuitive beliefs we hold, that our conscious experience is a seamless, ongoing process. In reality, however, the evidence suggests something stranger, something more discontinuous, constructed and fragile than we like to imagine. Let's begin with a simple metaphor. When you watch a movie, it appears smooth and fluid. Characters walk, talk, move with grace. But the film itself is made of discrete frames. individual still images played back at high speed. Your brain fills in the gaps, blending motion into a continuous experience. What if your consciousness works the same way? This idea has been proposed by several neuroscientists and philosophers. They suggest that consciousness may not be a stream, but a series of moments, with tiny gaps in between. These gaps aren't noticed because the brain is incredibly good at smoothing over the blanks, creating the illusion of a constant you watching an uninterrupted reality. Evidence for this comes from various places. Consider change blindness. This is a psychological phenomenon in which people fail to notice major changes in a visual scene when those changes occur during a visual disruption, like a blink, a flicker, or a camera cut. In one famous study, a person asks for directions, then is momentarily hidden behind a passing door, during which they're swapped with a different person. Many people don't notice the swap at all. This suggests that the continuity of perception is not constant. It's something the brain reconstructs based on expectation. Then there's motion-induced blindness, where objects in plain view disappear from consciousness when placed against certain moving backgrounds. Your eyes remain open, the object is still there, but your brain, for a few seconds, simply drops it from awareness. Again, the stream of consciousness is revealed to be more like a spotlight, narrow, selective, and easily disrupted. Another example is the attentional blink, a phenomenon where, if two visual targets appear in rapid succession, people often fail to perceive the second one if it appears within 200 to 500 milliseconds of the first. It's as if your awareness takes time to reload, and during that brief blink, you miss what's right in front of you. But perhaps the most direct evidence for the illusion of continuity comes from how the brain processes sensory information. There is a delay, sometimes a few hundred milliseconds, between when an event occurs and when you become consciously aware of it. Your brain takes time to collect data, compare it to expectations, and then present you with a final version of what happened. What you perceive as now is actually the recent past, neatly packaged for conscious awareness. This suggests that consciousness is always slightly behind reality, playing catch-up with the world. To cope with this delay, the brain engages in constant prediction. It anticipates what's going to happen next and fills in the blanks. You think you're experiencing a continuous flow, but you're actually experiencing the brain's best guess, assembled from snapshots, predictions, and memories. It's a stunning sleight of hand. This predictive ability is what allows you to function smoothly in the world. When you catch a ball, read a sentence, or listen to music, your brain is predicting the next moment before it happens. This helps maintain the illusion of continuity, but that illusion can be broken. Under anesthesia, during sleep, or in states of unconsciousness, that thread disappears. Yet when you wake up, the brain resumes the story. It picks up where it left off, often without acknowledging the gap. Unless something dramatic happens, like a vivid dream, you rarely notice that hours have passed without awareness. This happens every night, your consciousness stops, and then it starts again, and the you that wakes up in the morning simply assumes it's the same you who fell asleep the night before. But is it? Philosopher Derek Parfit once posed a thought experiment. Imagine a teleporter that scans your body, destroys it, and recreates an identical version of you elsewhere. This new version has all your memories, your personality, your preferences. Would it still be you? Most people instinctively say no. Something would be lost. The original is gone. But think about what happens when you go to sleep. For hours, you are unconscious. Then you wake, with your memories intact. What makes that different from the teleporter? This leads to the idea that the sense of a continuous self is not grounded in substance, but in narrative. You are the story your brain tells about its past. As long as that story remains coherent, the illusion of continuity holds. But what happens when memory breaks? In cases of amnesia, people can lose decades of memories in an instant. Their personality may shift. Their preferences may change. In some cases, they have no recollection of who they are, yet they remain conscious, aware, experiencing. If memory is the thread, then these cases suggest the thread can be cut and still leave someone who feels like me. This idea is echoed in split brain patients, as we saw earlier. Two separate hemispheres, each capable of awareness, each with a limited view, yet both seem to construct a self. It's echoed in dissociative disorders, in which multiple identities can inhabit the same brain, each believing itself to be the real self, each unaware of the others. So what does this mean? It means the self is not continuous, it's not stable, it's not even singular. It's a process, an ongoing act of construction. Like a web page constantly refreshing, the self is reloaded again and again, built from fragments of memory, sensation, and interpretation. But it feels continuous, and that feeling is powerful. It allows you to build a life, to plan, to dream, to love, to hope. It gives you a location in time and space. It gives your story a protagonist. And maybe that's the point. The self doesn't need to be continuous in the metaphysical sense. It just needs to be continuous enough to function. A bridge doesn't have to be made of one solid piece. It just needs to connect 2 points. In the same way, your consciousness doesn't have to be seamless. It just needs to carry you forward from moment to moment in a way that feels coherent. But when you look closely, the seams begin to show. And perhaps that's okay. Perhaps the beauty of consciousness lies not in its solidity, but in its fragility, its flexibility, its willingness to build something meaningful out of pieces. As you sit or lie here, listening to these words, remember, the person hearing this is not quite the same person who started listening minutes ago. Neurons have fired, synapses have changed, a new pattern has emerged, and the you who continues listening, continues existing, continues wondering, may be just the latest version of a self built fresh in every moment. If consciousness is a mystery within ourselves, it becomes an even greater enigma when we look beyond our species. For centuries, humans have drawn a firm line between us and everything else. We assumed we were unique, that consciousness belonged only to us, that we were the only ones who could think, feel, or suffer. But is that really true? Today, we're beginning to realize that the boundaries of consciousness might be far more porous than we once believed. Perhaps, just perhaps, consciousness is not a human invention, but a deeper property of the natural world, one that appears in many forms, in many places, with many faces. Let's begin with the most obvious question. Are animals conscious? For a long time, the answer was assumed to be no. Early scientists, following the lead of philosophers like René Descartes, treated animals as automata, complex biological machines without minds. They could act, react, even appear emotional, but they were believed to lack true awareness. But that view has steadily eroded. Today, most scientists agree that many animals are indeed conscious. They feel pain, they remember, they plan, they form relationships. Some even grieve. This recognition has been supported by decades of research in animal behavior, neuroscience, and cognition. Take octopuses, for example. These strange, alien-looking creatures have decentralized nervous systems, with most of their neurons located in their arms. They can solve puzzles, use tools, and escape enclosures with startling intelligence. They display curiosity and playfulness. Each one seems to have a distinct personality. If consciousness requires a human-like brain, how can a creature so evolutionarily distant from us display such mental flexibility? Then there are elephants, gentle giants who show signs of mourning their dead, recognizing themselves in mirrors and cooperating in complex ways. Crows and ravens, members of the corvid family, are capable of using tools, recognizing individual human faces, and even engaging in what appears to be deception. And of course, there are mammals like dolphins, dogs, cats, and primates, all of whom show rich emotional lives, problem-solving abilities, and in some cases, language-like communication. So, where do we draw the line? The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed in 2012 by leading neuroscientists, states, "The weight of evidence indicates that humans are not unique in possessing the neurological substrates that generate consciousness." In other words, many non-human animals likely possess consciousness, but consciousness might come in degrees. It might not be an all-or-nothing quality. Perhaps there are layers, dimensions, or flavors of awareness, some more complex than others, but all meaningful in their own way. This brings us to a deeper question. What kind of consciousness might exist in beings unlike us, not just in form but in structure, biology, or intelligence? Could plants be conscious? At first, the idea seems absurd. Plants lack brains, nerves, or anything resembling a central processing system. But recent research in plant neurobiology has revealed startling behaviors. Plants can communicate through chemical signals. They can detect light, gravity, touch, and even sound. Some can learn from experience, adjusting their behavior in ways that mimic memory. In one famous study, researchers dropped Mimosa pudica plants, a species known for folding its leaves in response to touch. Over time, the plants stopped reacting to harmless drops, suggesting they had learned the pattern. Even weeks later, they retained the memory. Is this consciousness? Probably not in the way we understand it, but it raises an important point. Intelligence and awareness may not require neurons or brains. Life may be more inventive than we imagined. Now turn your gaze even further to machines. With the rise of artificial intelligence, a new question has emerged. Could machines become conscious? Modern AI systems can write essays, play chess, diagnose diseases, and even carry on conversations. Some AIs can process vast amounts of information, learn from feedback, and adapt to new challenges. At what point does this become something more than computation? Some thinkers argue that if consciousness arises from information processing, then a sufficiently advanced computer could, in theory, develop subjective experience. This is the premise behind the functionalist view that what matters isn't the substance, carbon or silicon, but the structure and organization. If the right patterns are in place, consciousness might emerge, whether in a brain, a network, or a circuit board. Others disagree, pointing out that no matter how clever AI becomes, it still lacks qualia, the internal, subjective feel of experience. It might say, "I'm sad," but it doesn't feel sadness. It processes data, not feelings. This leads to the famous Chinese room argument, proposed by philosopher John Searle. Imagine a person who doesn't speak Chinese, locked in a room with a set of rules for manipulating Chinese symbols. From the outside, it seems like the person understands Chinese, but inside, there is no comprehension, only pattern following. Searle argued that this is what AI does. It simulates understanding without actually experiencing anything. And yet, what if we're wrong? What if one day machines do develop a kind of awareness? How would we know? Could we even recognize a non-human form of consciousness? This brings us to an even bolder idea. What if consciousness is not exclusive to biology at all? This is the foundation of panpsychism, the theory that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like space, time, or mass. In this view, all matter contains some degree of awareness, however primitive. Atoms, electrons, rocks, stars, each might carry a faint glimmer of consciousness. Panpsychism doesn't mean everything is thinking. It means everything has the potential for experience at some level. Combine enough of these tiny experiences in the right way, and you might get complex consciousness, like the kind we have. This view, though ancient in some traditions, is gaining traction in modern philosophy and physics. It offers a potential solution to the hard problem of consciousness by suggesting that awareness doesn't need to emerge from complexity because it was already present in the building blocks of reality. If this is true, then the universe may be alive in ways we've never imagined. Even without going that far, we must at least admit our understanding of consciousness is deeply limited by our own experience. We are a particular kind of mind, shaped by evolution, culture, and biology. Our perspective is narrow, our empathy is bounded, but maybe the cosmos is filled with minds unlike ours, quiet minds, alien minds, invisible minds. And maybe, just maybe, we are not alone in being aware. If animals are conscious, they are not less than us, only different. If AI ever becomes conscious, it won't be human, but it might still be something real. If consciousness is broader than brains, then we live in a world far richer than we've ever known. And so we must ask, what responsibility do we carry, knowing that consciousness may not be unique to us? Should we treat other animals with more care? Should we be cautious with how we build intelligent machines? Should we look more deeply at the things we once considered lifeless or inert? And perhaps most importantly, should we reconsider our place in the grand scheme of things? You, sitting or lying there, are one tiny spark of awareness. But you might not be alone. Your consciousness may be part of a vast constellation, millions of minds, seen and unseen, flickering through time. Consciousness is usually thought of as a stable presence, something like a spotlight focused on the world. But there are times when that spotlight flickers, changes color, expands, or even turns inward on itself. These are the moments when our ordinary awareness slips into altered states, and suddenly the world doesn't seem quite the same. In these states, we might feel weightless, boundless, timeless. We might hear voices or music that isn't there. We might feel the borders of the self dissolve. Sometimes we feel connected to something vast and inexplicable. Other times we feel completely untethered, as though floating outside reality. These moments are not just curiosities. They are windows into the most malleable aspects of consciousness. Let's begin with one of the most common altered states: dreams. Every night, your mind creates entire worlds while your body lies still. In dreams, you see, hear, feel, and think, often with intense emotion. You might speak to people who aren't real, visit places you've never been, or do things you've never done. You accept it all as normal until you wake. Why don't we realize we're dreaming while we're dreaming? The answer lies in how the brain functions during sleep. During REM sleep, the visual and emotional centers of the brain are highly active, while the prefrontal cortex, which handles logic and self-awareness, is largely offline. This creates a state where imagination runs wild, unchecked by the usual voice of reason. But sometimes, something extraordinary happens. You realize you're dreaming while still inside the dream. This is called lucid dreaming, and in that state, you can shape the dream world, make decisions, and explore your own imagination in real time. Lucid dreams hint at something powerful, that even within altered states, a form of consciousness persists, capable of reflection and agency. Now let's turn to meditation, an ancient practice found in nearly every culture. Meditation can involve focusing on the breath, repeating a mantra, visualizing an image, or simply observing thoughts without judgment. Over time, many practitioners report shifts in consciousness, a deep sense of stillness, the disappearance of thought, and even the dissolution of the sense of self. In some states, the boundaries between self and world vanish, and what remains is a kind of pure awareness. Neuroscience has begun to explore what happens in the brain during these meditative states. Using fMRI and EEG scans, researchers have observed changes in brain activity, particularly in the default mode network, DMN, a collection of regions associated with self-referential thinking. During deep meditation, the DMN becomes quieter and a different kind of awareness seems to emerge, one not centered on me. These findings suggest that the self is not a fixed structure, but a flexible process, one that can be turned down, tuned out, or even switched off temporarily. For many, these experiences are profoundly meaningful. They describe feelings of unity, peace, timelessness, or connection with the universe. In some cases, these altered states are described as mystical, beyond words, beyond logic, beyond the grasp of ordinary thought. And that brings us to a powerful and controversial class of experiences, those induced by psychedelics. Substances like psilocybin, found in magic mushrooms, LSD, DMT, and mescaline have been used for centuries in spiritual and healing ceremonies. When taken in sufficient doses, they can produce dramatic changes in perception, emotion, and thought. Users often report visions, encounters with seemingly intelligent entities, intense feelings of love or fear, and profound insights into the nature of reality or the self. Time may stretch or collapse, space may twist, the boundaries between the self and the universe may disappear entirely. One of the most striking features of psychedelic experiences is their consistency across cultures. People from vastly different backgrounds often describe similar stages: a sense of dissolution, visionary imagery, emotional catharsis, and sometimes an encounter with something greater than themselves. What some call the divine, infinite consciousness, or simply the mystery. What are we to make of these experiences? Some scientists argue that psychedelics reveal the true nature of consciousness, stripped of the filters that normally constrain it. Others believe they produce complex hallucinations, simulations created by the brain under chemical influence. Still others see them as access points to unconscious material, emotions, memories, and symbols buried deep within. Regardless of interpretation, what's clear is this: altered states often feel more real than reality itself. People come back changed. They report lasting increases in openness, compassion, and connectedness. Some lose their fear of death. Others reevaluate their life's purpose. Recent clinical research supports these claims. Psychedelics, when used in controlled settings, have shown promise in treating depression, PTSD, anxiety, and addiction. But what's most intriguing is how they work. Rather than dulling the mind, psychedelics seem to open it up, breaking down rigid patterns of thought, dissolving the ego, and allowing the brain to form new connections. Brain scans show increased communication between regions that don't usually interact. The brain becomes more globally interconnected, less modular, more flexible. In this state, the boundaries between self and world blur. Perception becomes fluid, time becomes irrelevant, and the person is left to reconstruct their identity in new and sometimes healing ways. But these experiences also come with risks. Without proper context, support, or intention, altered states can lead to confusion, fear, or psychological distress. The mind is delicate, and not all doors should be opened without care. Still, these states offer a glimpse into something profound. Consciousness is not a fixed lens. It is a kaleidoscope. It can be focused, expanded, dissolved, or reassembled. It is capable of perceiving not just the world, but itself. And in those rare moments, when consciousness turns inward, when it sees itself clearly, it may glimpse truths that defy description. As philosopher William James once said, "Our normal waking consciousness is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. Perhaps those forms are always present, just beyond the edge of awareness, and perhaps altered states are the cracks through which we catch a fleeting glimpse. Why does it feel like anything to be? You? This is the question at the heart of what philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. It's not about how the brain controls movement or processes language. Those are what he calls the easy problems, despite their complexity. The hard problem is something different, something deeper. Why is there subjective experience at all? You see the color red, taste chocolate, hear music, and these sensations aren't just inputs and reactions. They have feelings. There is something it is like to see red, or feel joy, or listen to rain. This inner world of experience is known as qualia, and it remains one of the greatest mysteries of the mind. Think of a robot. It can detect light, heat, sound. It can respond. But does it feel anything? Most would say no. It runs code. It processes. But it doesn't experience. So why do we? Neuroscience has mapped the correlates of consciousness, brain activity associated with awareness, but has not explained how or why those patterns produce feelings. We know what consciousness looks like in the brain, but not why it happens. Consider the famous thought experiment, Mary's Room. Mary is a scientist who knows everything about color vision, but she has lived her whole life in a black and white room, One day, she steps out and sees red for the first time. Did she learn something new? Yes, she learned what red feels like, something no amount of data could provide. This shows that subjective experience can't be reduced to objective knowledge. Some theories attempt to explain this. Integrated Information Theory, IIT, suggests that consciousness arises from systems that integrate information in complex ways. The more interconnected a system is, the more conscious it might be. But critics argue that even if we measure these integrations, it doesn't explain why they should feel like anything. Others, like panpsychism, suggest that consciousness is a basic property of the universe, like gravity or mass, that all matter has some primitive form of experience. It doesn't emerge from complexity. It was always there, and brains just organize it into something richer. This flips the problem on its head. Maybe the real mystery isn't how matter produces consciousness, but why we assume it shouldn't have it in the first place. Despite all our models and theories, the truth remains. We don't know why consciousness exists. It's the one thing we know most intimately, yet it may forever lie just beyond the reach of explanation. Still, in every moment you live, you know consciousness. Not through analysis, but through being. Through the simple act of awareness. The mystery persists, but so does the experience. And that, perhaps, is enough. After all we've explored, the science, the paradoxes, the mysteries, one question remains. What does consciousness mean? Not in the scientific sense, but in the personal one. To be conscious is to experience. It's to feel the warmth of sunlight, the ache of loss, the pull of memory. It's the quiet noticing of breath, the thrill of curiosity, the tenderness of love. These are not abstractions. They are the moments that make a life. Consciousness makes the world meaningful. Without it, there is no beauty, no suffering, no wonder. A mountain is just rock until someone stands before it in awe. A song is just vibration until someone hears it and weeps. A word is just sound until it reaches a mind that understands. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Not that we are conscious, but that we know we are. We reflect, we wonder, we ask, why? No other phenomenon in the universe seems to do that. So maybe the meaning of consciousness isn't something to be solved, but something to be honored. A fleeting gift, a light in the dark, a reminder that to be aware, even for a moment, is extraordinary. So as you rest now, let that awareness soften. Let the mind grow quiet, and know that even in sleep, the mystery continues, calm, deep, and beautifully unsolved.